We are a member-based community. You see here just a small sample of some of the logos of some of the great organizations that are in I4CP membership. They range from very large organizations like 3M and Microsoft, Visa, and many others. They really span across all market industry verticals, if you will, from high tech to banking, healthcare, manufacturing, you name it. We've got a lot of regional banks and healthcare organizations in membership, as well as a growing cohort of unicorn sort of startup companies. So if you're with one of our many member companies on the call today, special welcome to you. Great to have you with us. As I said earlier, I see we've got a pretty international audience today, obviously all four corners of the US, Canada, I saw Kenya, the UK, India. Great to have everyone with us. If you're not with a member organization but would like to learn more about what that entails, just reach out to anyone at I4CP, visit us at i4cp.com, and we'd be happy to get you that information. My name is Tom Stone. I'm a senior research analyst here at I4CP, and most weeks at this time on Thursdays, I have the pleasure of co-hosting and facilitating our Next Practices Weekly series. Joining me again, like she did last week, is my colleague Lorrie Lykins, our managing editor and VP of research. Good morning, Lorrie.
Good morning, Tom. How's it going? Good to see you.
Good. Yeah, good to see you. Great to be with you. Looking forward to the conversation today with our special guest, who we'll bring on in just a moment. But until then, a few other quick reminders and announcements. This is Next Practices Weekly. We occasionally miss a week due to holidays, things of that nature, but we generally meet every week. You see, we'll be having sessions coming up on January 30th next week with Mitch Schwartz from US Bancorp, and then we've got sessions coming up already lined up in February as well. We are a human capital research firm, and that means we do a lot of studies, a lot of surveys on a variety of topics, and we have one major study in the field now: leadership in the era of distributed work. Would love to have everyone on the call today, or some of your colleagues in your organization, whoever would be appropriate. Please consider doing this survey. It only takes 15 minutes. You'll get the results of the survey as soon as we close it in a few weeks. You can use the QR code on the screen to bring that up in another browser window, or the link that's been put over in the chat. Would love to have all companies on the call today represented in this important study. One that we just finished and are in the process of releasing both the report and the executive brief. The executive brief available now for download. Again, linked to that over in the chat. Also, we've got a new feature this year in Zoom. We're using Zoom Webinar, and there's a resources feature. You might not be familiar with this, but if you don't see it in your Zoom control bar, perhaps click more. It might come up there. Be a separate tab, sort of like the participants list or the chat. And you can get it that way, in addition to any links that are directly in the chat. This study, Workforce Readiness in the Era of AI, sort of an update from our 2023 AI study, also an update from our 2021 Workforce Readiness study. Lots of new data on how organizations are preparing for the future in this era of AI. We'll have a webinar on this coming up on February the 12th, so I'd encourage you to attend that, a public webinar with Catherine Brecken and Amber Burton, two of my peers on the research team, fellow senior research analysts. That's again February 12th at 1:00 p.m. Eastern. All right, with that, I think that's all the announcements we had for today. I'm going to turn things over to you, Lorrie, to facilitate the conversation and introduce our special guest.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Again, hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're sitting at the moment. I'm sitting in frigid Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, right on the shores of the beautiful Allegheny River, which is frozen, gigantic ice flows. So I'm expecting to see some penguins floating by at any moment. So if you're in a sunny location, I am happy for you and a little bit jealous. So this morning, from the land of the Golden Arches, we're really, really thrilled to welcome Lisa Schumacher, who's a director of education strategies and workforce policies. Lisa, welcome and good morning.
Good morning, Lorrie. Joining you from balmy Chicago, Illinois, where it went from -10 and we're at about 25 today. So sorry we sent you that frigid weather.
Yeah, we're sorry too. So Lisa's sitting in a fairly new, is it true? Is it accurate to say fairly new corporate office in
2018 we opened. So we're probably a little past fairly new, but yeah, new building.
But it is very much a gorgeous building. If you're in Chicago, I encourage you to take a drive by. It is really something else. So Lisa, let's get into, first of all, give us an overview of your career. I know you have spent your entire career in adult and workforce education, starting in the medical sector. Could you give us just an overview and tell us how you wound up at McDonald's?
Yeah, absolutely. So I worked in healthcare basically right out of college, and I would say traditional learning and development. I used to do new employee orientation at the University of Chicago Hospital back in the day. Spent a good chunk of my career doing that work. And then I moved to a national nonprofit called the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning, or CALE, where I led an organization within that nonprofit called Workforce Chicago, which was basically a best practice network of companies who were heavily invested in learning and development for their employees, specifically their frontline to mid-level employees. And then from there, I came to the Golden Arches, and I have been here for about 12 years. I came in as the excuse me, Director of Education Strategies and Workforce Policy, with really a directive of we want to do something in the workforce development space. And honestly, that was about the direction I got. And so it was from there that we started building out what we thought was really something cutting edge, impactful for our frontline workers, for the folks that work in our restaurants.
So before we get into talking about archways to
Yeah.
opportunities, I'd be curious, if you can indicate in the chat, everybody who's with us today, are you aware, have you heard of archways to opportunities? Is this something that you've heard of and you're aware of and you know about it? It's familiar to me a little bit, but really specifically about it's a college scholarship program. I did not realize really how vast, deep, and broad Archways to Opportunities
Sure.
is. So I'm really excited to unpack it. But I'm curious if other folks on the call have know much about it, or if this is going to be some new education that you're going to be sharing with them.
It looks like you're in the majority, Lori.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your role at
Sure.
McDonald's and where you sit in the organization and how all of that relates to Archways to Opportunity and the leadership that you're providing there.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we had the prep call, I think there was sort of an assumption that I sat in the people space and the HR space, and I do not. When I joined McDonald's, I did sit in the people space and sort of the, again, traditional learning and development space. But about 4 years ago, my team and I moved over to our global impact, newly created global impact team. And under global impact, in addition to my team, sits our media team, our communications team, our sustainability team, our policy team, and all of our government relations staff. So it's a bit of I would say kind of a unique position, but we really, the reason that we made the move is because we really do see this work, which I will get into in a minute, as being an impact in the communities where we do business, having an impact on the reputation of McDonald's and who we are as an employer. And so that was the decision for that move into the newly formed global impact team. I do have obviously a close relationship with our people team, especially our US people team, since the work I'm going to talk about today is primarily happening in the United States. And so I work closely with our HR team and our learning and development team. HR team primarily as sort of the outreach arm to our field offices, to our business units, to the folks, to our franchisees, to the people in our restaurants.
So can we talk about what Archways to Opportunity
Yeah.
covers? What are the components of it? What your goals are, just all of it. And I think you may have a couple
Yeah.
of slides to share or not, but let's unpack what
Yeah.
that's all
Yeah.
about.
It's my favorite topic.
Okay.
So happy to share. So we launched Archways to Opportunity in 2015, which means we are celebrating our 10-year anniversary this year, which we're all very excited about. And it was really under sort of this umbrella of, because of our size and scale, we can really have an impact on what's happening from a skills gap and an education gap in the United States, and really see it as this sort of shared value proposition that not only helps our business, but also helps the individuals working at restaurants, and also helps, again, the communities where we do business. Just to give people a little bit, I know everybody is probably familiar with who McDonald's is, but sort of the context of who we are. About 96% of our restaurants in the United States are franchise restaurants. So the folks that work in those restaurants are employees of our independent franchisees. So only about 4 or 5% are actually considered corporate restaurants, corporate employees. But again, it was created thinking about, okay, who are the people that work in our restaurants? Where do they fall along that education spectrum? And how can we, again, have some level of impact on the education and skills gap that exists? About 850,000 people work in our restaurants. We hire about 1 million people a year. So, we can have an impact because of our size and our scale. And understanding that we have folks working in our restaurants who fall all along that education spectrum. We have people who don't speak English, up through folks who are in college or maybe want to go to college. And so we really wanted to create something that met people at their point of need and also took them to where they want to go. And I think this is a bit of a differentiator for us. When I say take them to where they want to go, we know that for most people, working in a McDonald's restaurant is a first job, it's a springboard job, and most folks are going to go on to something else. We have lots of people who grow up in our system. We have lots of franchisees. About 60% of our franchisees started as crew, and they now have very large organizations that have a very clearly delineated career path in them. Obviously, the career path within the restaurant is clearly delineated and has been for 60 plus years. But again, for a lot of people, for most people, they're going to go on to something else. And I'm not sure if folks are familiar with this, but we have a current campaign running called 1 in 8, because 1 in 8 Americans have worked in a McDonald's restaurant, which is just a crazy statistic. And I think probably we are the only company that can say something like that. So now I'm waiting for the chat to see who our 1 in 8ers are. If there's anybody on the call that has worked in a McDonald's restaurant, or that was their first job.
Yeah. I hope, please do chime in, folks, on the chat. If you
we got one.
worked at
Jolene,
McDonald's,
one of my
even if it was decades ago, that is an amazing stat. And I was already having this thought earlier when you talk about, the impact that this program, which we're going to hear a lot more details on here in just a moment, for a company that didn't have that kind of change in the workforce, like you say, hiring 1 million people a year, you would touch a lot fewer people with a similar program. But because of the nature of McDonald's in this way, you've touched so many people.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if you flip to the next slide, you'll see, actually, go ahead.
Look at all these people in the chat, Lisa.
I know, this is amazing. I love this.
Your former head, your now retired Rob Lauber, head of learning and talent development at McDonald's. I love how he has always talked about that we want to be everyone's best first job.
Right.
I think that's just a great goal. But wow, a lot of first timers there.
Yeah. This is great. Thank you all. You made my day. Love it. So happy to get into some of the specifics around what is Archways and sort of what falls under the umbrella of Archways to Opportunity. So again, where do people in our restaurants fall along that education spectrum, wanting to create something that met all of them, attempted to meet all of them at their point of need? And so when I started at McDonald's, we had an existing English as a second language program, an existing ESL program called English Under the Arches. And the directive was really like, we see some great results from this. We were seeing great retention rates from our English Under the Arches program. And folks wanted more. What else could that look like? And so English Under the Arches, our ESL program, we have a high school completion program, we have a college completion program, and then we also offer academic and career advising services. So happy to go just give a little detail about each one of those and then answer Lorrie, any questions that you might have. Yeah. So our English Under the Arches program, again, ESL program, it is contextualized for McDonald's. Pre-COVID, we actually did it as in-person cohorts with community college instructors. Post-COVID, obviously during COVID, post-COVID, we moved to virtual, and it continues to be virtual, but is an instructor-led cohort model. People are paid for their time in the class. And again, it's contextualized for McDonald's. So like our entry level, we have 4 levels of courses, but our entry level course is called shift management. So it's like, what does it sound like to run a shift in a McDonald's restaurant? The second component under the Archways umbrella is our high school completion program. We work with a fully accredited online high school district called Career Online High School. So it is a high school diploma program. It is not a GED program. We know that there are around 45 million, I don't know what the latest stat is, working adults in this country who don't have a high school diploma, and also understand that that is a barrier to moving on to a career pathway. And we know that we have folks working in restaurants who did not complete high school, some of them at the highest level, some of them are general managers of our restaurants. And so the high school completion program is competency-based, designed specifically for working age adults who had some level of educational trauma. The reason they dropped out of high school, I think the stat is that most folks drop out, majority of folks drop out of high school the second semester of their junior year. And so they have credit. And so this organization works with them to transfer that credit from their high school. We've had people complete in as quickly as 3 months. Most people complete in about 10 months or so. Again, competency-based program. It is career-driven. So the first course they take is a career course, and they have, I think there's now 12 different pathways they can choose, everything from general business management to homeland security to college prep. There's a childcare track. Everyone has an advisor, a success coach that's really there helping them along the way. And every one of our graduates, of which we have over 2,000, every one of our graduates has told us that without that coach, without that person sort of prodding them and pushing them and answering their questions and really holding their hand through the process, they probably wouldn't have completed.
Lisa, on that,
yeah.
I'm glad you emphasized the importance of the coach, because I was just assuming that was probably a big part of it. One just logistical thing, I've probably wrongly assumed that things like GEDs and these sort of high school programs are state by state in nature, but I guess they're not. If you've got a partner, and it works across all states and even internationally, I suppose.
It definitely works across the United States. I'm assuming it's international, but no one's ever asked me that question before. But it is a high school diploma, so it would be no different than the high school diploma that I have or you have.
Okay, interesting. I just assumed that those kind of things were you'd have to have a different program for each 50 state, but it sounds like you don't.
That would be really challenging for my team of 4 to do. So thankfully we don't. And again, it's a fully accredited online high school district, and that's an important distinction, that it's fully accredited.
Wow, that's terrific.
The third component of our choice is around college completion, and is, we think about affordability and accessibility in this bucket of work. By far, the most popular component of our choice opportunity is our tuition assistance program. So our tuition assistance program is available to all restaurant employees who have been working in a restaurant for 90 days and work an average of 15 hours a week. So pretty low eligibility requirements. They have access to $2,500 annually towards any accredited institution. And that's a really important distinction, because there are some organizations that only give them tuition assistance for a handful of schools or one school. But they can use it at any accredited institution. And that was really important to us, because when we think about the people that work in our restaurants and community colleges, there really is an overlap. I mean, the population that community colleges are designed to serve really does reflect many of the folks that work in our restaurants. So we wanted people to be able to use their tuition assistance at their local community college. They don't have to use it there, but they do have the opportunity to do that. Our managers are actually available to get $3,000 annually. So $2,500 for crew, $3,000 for our managers. We do have a handful of partner schools that we work directly with. We work with Colorado Tech University. We've actually been working with them since the launch of Archways in 2015. And what we've worked with them on is a no debt, no out-of-pocket cost degree program. So someone working in the restaurants can get a 2-year or a 4-year degree with no debt and no out-of-pocket costs to them. So between the funds that we put in and the funds that Colorado Tech puts in, they get a degree for free, which is pretty amazing. We also work with Western Governors University, and we work with Excelsior University also.
I mean, Coming out with a college degree with no debt is phenomenal. That's life-changing. We all know that.
Yes, yeah. The other thing and we actually had all of our education partners here in Chicago with us yesterday. And it's really what's fascinating to start seeing now, because we've been at this for 10 years, is folks who started in the English Under the Arches program, then got their high school diploma, and now are graduating from college. I mean, that being able to see that trajectory, and then seeing that they moved from crew to a general manager or an area supervisor. So we're starting to see those stories, a lot of those stories emerge. We talked with Colorado Tech University, who was here yesterday, and they are expecting 450 graduates this year is the sort of projected number of graduates, which is just incredible, incredible to see. We also talked a lot about sort of this changing the cycle, right? I mean, and I don't have the statistics off the top of my head, but the likelihood that I'm going to graduate from high school because my parents graduated from high school, right, significantly higher. Same on the college side. And so we really do feel like we're having impact, and we see that in the pictures that we get from our franchisees, for which we call operators, right? We see graduations happening, ceremonies happening in the restaurants, and you see the mom with her young children, and she says, I'm the first person in my family to get my high school diploma. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. And so we're really directly impacting people's lives. And then just really quickly, sorry, go ahead, Lori.
And indirectly, Lisa, when you think about the ripple effects of 450 people completing their educations, friends, family members, just it's infinite, it's immeasurable, but that's phenomenal.
Yeah, we recently, in the last 2 weeks, we've had a mother's son get their high school diploma and a husband wife get their college degrees. So it's just, I mean, the pictures I get to see every day are amazing. That's
fabulous.
And then the final component of Archways, which doesn't get as much attention and love as it should, but this is near and dear to my heart because of the work I did at Kale, is advising services. And we know in the U.S. that the state of advising in this country is pretty abysmal. I think the statistic is it's one advisor to every 500 students. I currently have a freshman in high school, and I think he met with his advisor for 3.5 minutes. I mean, literally it was scheduled for like that amount of time. And so, you think about folks who don't have access to any advisors. They don't know anyone who's ever gone to college. They have no idea how to navigate the challenging, complicated world of higher education. And so anyone working in our restaurants and their immediate family have access to advisors through our relationship with Bright Horizons EdAssist. They have access to advisors that can help them navigate that world. And it could be something like, how do I fill out a FAFSA, or what is a FAFSA, which is very complicated, by the way, because I also have a freshman in college, to, how much time do I need to be successful at the college level? Does that fit in my life right now? What areas of study am I interested in? Is that something that's going to, sort of get me to my next job or my next career path? And again, those advisors are available, and there's no eligibility requirement there. They are available at no cost to all of our restaurant employees.
Lisa, is financial literacy a component of that advising?
It is not specifically. We do offer through other programs financial literacy, but it's not part of that piece. Yeah.
I don't know. Well, you've been speaking, so I'll just point out we have somebody in the chat who said they're a recipient of a scholarship from McDonald's and very grateful to your organization every day.
Wonderful. Wonderful to hear. Congrats.
Somebody's asking, what was the name of that advising group again? Was it Bright Horizons?
Yeah, so Bright Horizons, and for those of you in the U.S., the Bright Horizon Child Care Center, it's the same company, but they have an arm of the company called EdAssist, and they are sort of our back office tuition assistance provider. Because the folks in our restaurants aren't our employees, we can't have access to their specific data, so we have to use a third party to do that processing.
Got it. Thanks. Are you planning on doing a 10-year observance of, 10 years of Archways, here's where we are?
Yes, every day of 2025. No, I'm just kidding. But yes, we are. We are working with a research firm and an agency, and we are going to do a 10-year anniversary report. We're still sort of working out the details of what that's going to look like. But part of it will certainly be sort of an emphasis on the storytelling. So the person who started, came to this country from somewhere else, didn't speak the language, got a job at McDonald's, went through English on the Arches, got their high school diploma, now is a general manager of a restaurant, or now is a college degree, or now is a nurse or a teacher or a firefighter, and people who have moved on to a different career. So that's our plan, to highlight not only the statistics, but also the stories.
So speaking of stats, we've had several questions in the chat
Yeah.
about metrics. What are your metrics? What are you measuring? How
Yeah.
does all of that look like?
Well, if you flip to the next slide, you'll see the big metrics, the number of people we've touched. So we've given away, this number is actually at about 200, a little over 200 million now. So 200 million awarded in tuition assistance, and we've touched upwards of about 83,000 restaurant employees. So provided access to education for tens of thousands of people working in our restaurants. So we track participation, we track dollars awarded, we track graduations from our partner organizations. Part of the challenge of offering tuition assistance at any accredited institution is we don't, and the fact that these folks aren't our employees, is we don't have the ability to track sort of what that looks like across organizations. And that's an important piece of working with our partner organizations. The other piece I will mention is we did do an ROI study back in 2020 with Accenture. So that's important because this is not my area of expertise. And we looked at promotion rates, retention rates. And what we saw is that Archways participants were 2.5 times more likely to be promoted in their restaurants, and retention was 2 times greater for Archways participants. We actually got down to sales numbers, not direct causation, obviously, but correlated between restaurants who had high Archways participation. We saw a 1% bump in sales. And I know 1% doesn't sound like a big number, but 1% at McDonald's is a huge number. And so to be able to show like that level of impact was really, really huge for us. I mean, any research study you look at around tuition assistance shows that it has an impact on the business. So I assumed that we were going to get good numbers, but it still makes me really happy that we got down to that sales number.
I was wondering, you mentioned the retention numbers and the promotion numbers. I think you said in store, though. I'm curious, do you have even anecdotal data on how many people went through these programs, any of the 4 aspects of the programs, maybe especially though the high school and or college ones, and then got promoted into corporate? And are there examples of people that have, I mean, it's only been these past 10 years, but how high have some people risen? I suppose if down the road they could rise pretty high.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have anecdotally have examples of folks who have come from the restaurant level up through not only into corporate, but again, because we're a franchise organization, we have about 1,800 franchisees. And some of these franchise organizations are very large. We have franchisees who own, 60 plus restaurants, 20 plus restaurants, down to somebody who owns 1 or 2 restaurants. But those folks, those franchisees who have large franchise organizations, people are able to navigate their careers within that organization. So sort of their version of corporate, right? So if I'm a franchisee who owns upwards of 20 restaurants, I have a whole infrastructure, right? I have area supervisors who manage 5 or 6 restaurants. I have a training infrastructure. I have an HR infrastructure. I have a maintenance infrastructure. I've got an operations infrastructure. So I have marketing, right? All of those things exist, especially within those large franchisees. So there's, I think, before we talked about career pathing, McDonald's has had a career path. Before we talked about skills-based hiring, McDonald's has been doing skills-based hiring. So I think that those things are sort of inculcated into our organization.
So you mentioned ROI earlier. What is the budget for something like this look like? What is your annual budget for Archways?
So I would say from a tuition assistance standpoint, we probably give away about 25 million, and we've had ebbs and flows. COVID, we saw a big decrease, but it's about 25, 30 million annually. I will tell you that our franchisees as of 2021 now pay 50% of that tuition. So the corporate US McDonald's pays 50% of the tuition assistance, and then that franchisee pays 50% of their actual tuition assistance.
Got it. So what is next? What's ahead? What are your aspirations for Archways?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is space for us to sort of play, which is maybe not the right word, but play in the skills-based hiring space. And I don't mean that from a corporate perspective. I mean that from how do we credentialize the learning that happens not just in McDonald's frontline jobs, but in all frontline jobs. You know, when I think about, I tell a lot of our partners, like, just go sit in a McDonald's restaurant for a couple hours and watch our crew. I mean, it's a hard job. You'd sort of be amazed at all the things that they have to handle and juggle in any given shift. And so how do we give people credit for the learning that they're going through, whether it's, our technology, and there's a lot of technology in our restaurants, or hospitality training, food safety training, and then also the work that they're doing in that restaurant. And so how do we, again, credentialize that so that other employers, so that next step employer recognizes that as a skill that translates into that next step. When we think about the folks that work in our restaurants, the skills that they're learning just by virtue of being in our restaurants, by virtue of being a crew member or a shift manager or a department manager in our restaurants, are skills, are critical work readiness skills that are going to stay with them and support them and translate into any career pathway that they choose. So I think it's sort of that recognition of that skill set, and what does that look like as we all start talking about this concept of skills-based hiring.
Lisa, I'm curious about how this is promoted internally. What does your communications campaign look like to really make sure everybody understands what Archways is all about?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Yeah, and that, I mean, we've been at this for 10 years, and that will always be our number one challenge, right? If you think about, 850,000 people working in the restaurant, they're not our employees. Turnover, not surprisingly, at the restaurant level is high. And so it's this, how do we keep this sort of constantly in front of people? We actually had an operator franchisee panel yesterday in front of our, education partners. And it was interesting because our franchisees talk about, well, we talk about this in orientation, which is great. But when we ask crew, how did you hear about it? Most of the time they say a crew room poster, so old school, or from my manager. And if you think about somebody going through orientation, any job, first day job orientation, right? Like, what time do I have to be here? When am I going to get paid? What uniform do I have to wear? What am I going to be doing? Sort of this thought of, oh, and by the way, you can complete high school or you can complete college. That, they're drinking from a fire hose that day. They're getting a lot of information. So yes, it's important that we talk about it in orientation, but what does that look like as a consistent message? And so we are always talking with our franchisees about what is the best way to get that information to you. And it's a constant struggle, to be honest. So we are, in front of our franchisees as much as possible. We're in front of our general managers as much as possible. There are various convenings that happen across any given year and across the country. And so it's, me on stage talking about it to our general managers to, how do you talk to your employees about this? Do you talk to your employees about this? We have a goal of one per restaurant. And honestly, it's a way to sort of make it a talking point and make it easy to say to a franchisee, like, okay, you can get one person in your restaurant to participate. I think the beauty of this work is that the more we do and the more storytelling that we embark on, the message really does grow word of mouth. So if I'm a franchisee who has a graduation in my restaurant, every other person that works in the restaurant sees that happening.
Right.
So even if they didn't know about it, now they know about it, and now they want to know more about it. So a lot of that, again, kind of old school word of mouth communication is what we rely on. I think we're getting better at sort of digital communication and pushing messages out. We will always have the challenge of not our employees. We don't have a way to sort of email everyone. We don't have that kind of database to work with. But it's a constant. What works now? I mean, we had a conversation with 3 of our franchisees yesterday, and the comment was, we need a really sturdy poster in the actual dining area of the restaurant. So people walking in that might want to work here see it, so our customers see it, so they know what we're doing. But again, it's a poster.
Right. Right. Well, we know from our research that the number one source of, really quality hires is employee referrals. So I'm not
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Lisa, that one slide that you showed initially that showed the employee with the mortar board tassel, it reminded me that I've seen videos. I don't know if it's commercials that McDonald's has run, but
Yeah.
I've seen videos of that, which I think are really inspiring. I'm curious if Archways has its own social media presence. Are you encouraging people to share their videos and their still photos to help promote that on social media?
Yeah, so there are challenges at McDonald's of sort of creating our own presence. But I will tell you again, I think we're getting more savvy. What we really try to do is encourage our franchisees who have a strong social media presence to post those stories themselves, because those are actually happening in the restaurant level.
Yeah.
We also try to do a lot with our leaders, our corporate leaders, posting graduations and congratulations. You'll see more of that this year because of the 10-year anniversary. If you flip to the next slide, actually, this is my favorite slide. And the good news is I could have 17 slides that look like this, but just gives you an idea of what that sort of social media presence has looked like.
That's great.
Wow, very nice. I had a question to what extent have you had other companies, other organizations, so maybe not other restaurants because they're competitors, but others in retail or maybe government, federal or state or local governments, anyone else that has a pretty high level of turnover, a lot of lower skilled workers that would benefit from these sort of early career programs. Have they come to you and like done workshops from you to learn from your learnings?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of them are competitors. But sort of my perspective on that is the more that companies can do that impact our frontline workforce, the better for everyone. And so absolutely, we share. We don't do anything necessarily formal. I mean, I speak a lot at different conferences and such, so we don't do anything sort of from the center formally, but have talked to many companies about what we do and answered questions about how they might be able to replicate something. So
yeah, because I know a lot of there are government programs out there, and I know Amazon has done this sort of leaning into educating the broader workforce, even beyond people that work directly at their fulfillment centers and so on. But few companies have had the impact in this way that McDonald's has. So
yeah, Amazon. I'm typically, when I'm at conferences talking in this space, Amazon and Walmart are there too.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Yeah, it is. I think competition is also a great driver for innovation.
Absolutely.
Have you been able to link what you're doing with Archways to talent attraction?
So again, not specifically, but I think one of our sort of things that we point to, that I point to as a demonstration that this quote unquote works from a recruitment and a retention standpoint is we used to pay 100% of the tuition assistance. And again, in 2021, we moved to a 50-50 split. Our franchisee had to sign an agreement that said, yes, we'll pay the 50%. I have no idea what I thought that percentage was going to be, but 92% of our operators opted in. And 92% of our operators don't typically do anything. So it was great to see their commitment to it. And what I know is that they would not have opted in if they weren't seeing the results in the restaurants.
Got it. William had a little bit of a two-part question. Let's ask about the second part. Are those who've benefited from the Archways program encouraged to serve as spokespersons or ambassadors, I suppose, for the program?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we try to use, again, sort of that storytelling component as much as possible.
And also, are you offering employees coaching for specific jobs or at certain org levels within the restaurants and at corporate?
So we have a whole learning and development training infrastructure. And so there are learning modules and courses that go along with, if I'm a crew person or if I'm a shift manager, all the way up through general manager and what we call mid-managers, which is actually a role outside of the restaurants. And so there is learning and coaching available for all of those roles. It just sits outside of my purview.
And someone asked, is a tuition assistance paid through corporate or by the individual franchisees? I think you've covered that a little bit.
Yeah, so both. Yeah, so it's 50-50.
50-50.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Curious, Lisa, we've been talking about the Archways to Opportunity program. What other workforce development programs do you have at McDonald's? This one's been huge and is successful. It's got to be the flagship, but anything else that you can share?
At a corporate level, we started in, I'm gonna get the years wrong, 22, it's 25 now, right? Yeah, so 2022, we launched a apprenticeship, a cybersecurity apprenticeship program. There's a large sort of apprenticeship movement in the city of Chicago, led by Zurich, Accenture, and Aon. And so for a few years, really started thinking about what that would look like at McDonald's. It took me 4 years to get us there. But in 2022, we did launch a cybersecurity apprenticeship program. Starting small, we hired 3 apprentices. Those 3 have graduated. They have full-time roles in our IT tech function. And we just hired, I think we're hiring 4 this round. So I think we just hired 4 more. So we're going to continue to do that, excuse me, in the tech space, in the cyberspace, and then think about what that might look like as an expanded program. But that's at the corporate level.
I'm curious also. Oh, go ahead, Lorrie.
I was just going to ask, I'm so curious about that because I wouldn't intuitively connect McDonald's with cybersecurity. How did you land on that? How was that choice made?
Well, I will tell you the real story. Again, I worked for years to try to sort of sell the idea of what apprenticeship could look like at McDonald's. And we had a new leader of our cyber function who had a real passion around this idea of bringing in different talent pools into his organization, specifically into his organization. And he also was forward thinking enough to understand that he needed those other talent pools because he couldn't fill the jobs that he had. And so that was really the impetus. I finally found the leader who understood what apprenticeships were, who really wanted to have passion around moving this forward. That person has since left the organization, but the person that came in to fill that role came from Lockheed Martin, who has a long history of doing apprenticeship. So lucky for me, that program gets to continue on in front of that leader. And lucky for me, the first 3 we hired were absolute rock stars. And so it really demonstrated the impact that, thinking differently, thinking outside the box about who your talent pools are can have a real impact.
And just a real testament to the power of the internal networks. And one of our colleagues, Rob Cross, a huge researcher on internal networks and what those look like and the power of collaboration. That's a great story.
Curious, we have a question here from Julie in the chat. Are there other areas of McDonald's where apprenticeships have been fruitful, maybe on a lesser scale or not?
Not in the US, but we have very, very robust apprenticeship programs in other markets, specifically our European markets.
Okay. And then I'm curious too, with all of your knowledge of workforce development and all our Archways, obviously, but the cybersecurity apprenticeships also. What do you see as next? Do you plan on other apprenticeship programs, other things of that nature to come? What would you say?
I mean, I'd love to see that. I have a team of 3 people, so there's 4 of us. And so sort of the what's next and expansion I have to take that into account. I also have to take into account sort of the first question I ask myself when we come up with something is, can I scale it, right? It may work really well. And, the comment always is everything is local. That's really challenging for us. We could stand something up that was really cool in, I don't know, Huntsville, Alabama, but then how do I scale that? Is it scalable with the resources that we have, specifically the human resources that we have? I think apprenticeship is a bit like that. Like I'd love to see the expansion of apprenticeship at the corporate level. I mean, to be honest, I would say 95% of my focus is on our restaurant employees. Certainly because we are in the city of Chicago, we sit on the west side of the city. We do have a great opportunity to expand that apprenticeship program. So that it's absolutely on my radar. But again, most of my focus is on what's happening in our restaurant, what's happening with our restaurant employees.
You just gave a couple of good tips that lead into maybe my last question that I can think of, which is if there's others on the call in their organization that would want to do something, maybe not apprenticeship, which you just spoke to, but more like Archways, obviously on a smaller scale, probably few companies are as big as McDonald's, but who knows? Maybe there's some big companies here on the call that that could rival that 10 years from now. What would be your advice from your learnings? Like, what are some gotchas with getting a program like Archways off the ground?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of step one is understanding who are the people that work in your organization and where do they fall along that education spectrum, right? There's a lot of companies who have a tuition assistance program. I think for a lot of them, it's kind of a checklist benefit. It's sort of table stakes at this point. But are there people who can get to that point someday, but aren't there yet because they don't know the language, because they, have some remedial challenges, or because they don't have a high school diploma, which is obviously the case for us. So understanding where people are in that education spectrum, I think is really an important first step. I think there's obviously also the step of, is it something that as an organization culturally that you're committed to, right? Is that sort of the thing that you want to do, the thing you want to invest in, and why? I spoke earlier about our ROI, study. Obviously, recruitment and retention is critical to running our business, but also, brand reputation is important to us. Who we are as an employer is important to us, and this obviously is a critical narrative in that space. I'm sure everyone on this call has had the challenge of like being passionate about something, and how do you translate that passion into getting resources to do it? So I think thinking about, will you have leadership support? Will you have leadership investment? Is an important top question to ask yourself. And then I think, I mentioned scale, and that's really important to us, is how do we scale this? And then I think the other piece of it is, who are going to be your partners, specifically in this education space, right? We wouldn't be able to do this without our education partners. We are not a college or university. We are not a credentialing body. So who are the right partners, and finding those partners early on to help you build a program that you want to build.
And this makes me, and Tom, please chime in, makes me think about all of the culture research that I4CP has done over the years. And one of the things that we know irrefutably is that high-performing organizations, they are much more likely to describe their cultures as cultures of learning. Their learning cultures, it all goes together. And this is also data that came out of our research that we've done with Upskill America in partnership with them. We know from a global perspective, the demographics are really stark in terms of talent gaps, shrinking talent pools, declining birth rates. There are a lot of parts of the world where mandatory retirement age is pretty young. I mean, 50-ish in some countries. So there needs to be—
Sign me up for that.
But there needs to be some recalibrating of that, because
Absolutely.
especially with the skilled trades workers, we're just really needing to raise the red flags about what's going on with demographics. So upskilling, the reskilling, the really reinforcement that this organization is a learning. We're constantly learning, as Microsoft talks about it. We're we're an organization of learn-it-alls, not know-it-alls. But
and I just saw that question pop up about sort of what's next. I think the other thing that I think about often in the what's next is I think what you're alluding to, Lorrie, is, how do we make sure that our restaurant employees understand the skills that they're learning and how those skills are transferable to other industries, other jobs, other career paths. And then when you put education on top of that, where can that take them? So one of the things that we did also in 2020 was we launched what we call a career navigation app, Archways to Careers. And it shows them in an app on their phone, okay, as a shift manager, here are the competencies I have, here's the skills I'm learning. And if I want to go into healthcare, what are those transferable skills? And by the way, there's a lot of them, right? What are those transferable skills? And if I want to be a radiology tech, what kind of education do I need? And then how do I leverage Archways to get that education to move into that, to a healthcare career path, as an example? So more of that, I think, is really what's next for us.
I love the mention of tech, involving the app there. We've got some other I4CP member companies that have been able to leverage phone apps for great uses. I know one such company, Target, they've developed a mobile app to help frontline employees at their stores deal with scheduling, so that they don't always have to go to the manager if they need to reschedule, things of that nature. So love to see the leaning into technology. Of course, the big buzz technology in all of the world right now, and including in HR, is AI. I remember interviewing who Lorrie mentioned earlier, Rob Lauber, former CLO at
Yep.
McDonald's years ago when we did our first automation study, and he shared with me some of the things that was happening with automation and AI at the restaurant level at McDonald's. We didn't prep you with this question, but I'm curious, could you share with us, do you work a lot with the restaurants? I'm sure you're hearing things.
Yeah, I don't do a ton of direct work with the restaurants, but obviously, if you've been to a drive-through, not just at McDonald's, but pretty much any drive-through at this point, you're experiencing to some degree AI. So that is happening. I think, sort of where I lean into this technology piece at the restaurant level is, again, this idea of, what are people in our restaurants learning? What are they getting exposed to, right? So if we think about sort of the technology that exists, whether it's AI or our POS system or whatever it might be, how do we credentialize that, right? Like how do we demonstrate that person is really comfortable, like sort of this technology comfortability, because they showed the senior citizen how to use the McDonald's app while they were standing in the restaurant. So not only are they comfortable with it, they're able to teach it. Right? Those are skills. Those are real skills that transfer into other industries. So as more and more, I know I'm not really answering your question, but as more and more sort of AI gets embedded in the restaurant, that skill set is just going to continue to grow.
Lorrie, any other questions you have at this point? This has been
No,
great. You're already getting kudos, Lisa, in the chat. People find it very inspiring.
Yeah. I have the pleasure, the honor, and I'm humbled regularly by the stories that come across my desk every day, right? Of the life-changing impact that people getting access to education and being able to grow their careers, being able to support their families has. So I consider myself lucky.
So Lisa, one last question that we do like to ask leaders. You mentioned you have a lean team of 4 folks, but if you were looking to add to your team, what do you look for in terms of the talent that you want to bring into the organization? What are the key things that you really focus on?
Yeah, not something I ask myself regularly because we have been a team of 4 for 10 years now, the same 4.
Oh, wow.
So, which is, says a lot. I think familiarity in the workforce space, knowledge of the workforce space, knowledge of the higher ed space is obviously critical to the work. I have one person on my team who actually started in the restaurants when she was 15. She left, got a degree, went into higher education, and now full circle, she's a 1 and 8er, right? Full circle moment, she's back doing this work with us. So I think that sort of, entry level experience obviously plays a role. And I know maybe this sounds trite or quaint or whatever, but a passion for this work, a passion for the folks that we serve, who they are, what their barriers are, what their challenges are, what their goals and dreams are is a really big piece for us.
A wonderful way to wrap up the discussion. And I don't know if you have a chance to look at the chat, but very impressive, very inspiring. People are feeling really, really energized, Lisa. So thank you so much.
That's great. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'll wrap things. I want to double down on that. Thank you so much, Lisa. Great conversation. People are giving you lots of kudos in the chat. A couple of things to wrap us here. And thank you, Lorrie, for facilitating. Outstanding job as always. You had mentioned, Lorrie, earlier our partnership with Upskill America. So I just do want to note, especially for members of I4CP, if you didn't see our frontline worker study from last year, you can download the full report for that. There's probably, I believe, an executive brief also available for non-members. But we actually partnered with Upskill America several years ago, and as part of that created some very helpful guides that I sort of see as evergreen, and 2 of them were focused on TAP, tuition assistance programs, so very relevant to the conversation today with Lisa. If you're a member of I4CP, I would just search on Upskill America or upskilling and reskilling, and you should be able to find those resources. Also want to note, as we do every week, our upcoming conference, our annual event, Next Practices Now for 2025 will be March 3rd through 6th, a little bit earlier in the month than previous years, trying to avoid spring break conflicts and so on. It's in Scottsdale, Arizona, as always, at the beautiful Fairmont Princess. If you haven't registered yet and are still thinking about it, do so as soon as you can, because rooms are filling up fast. We've got a great lineup of speakers. Here's just a small sample, probably 3 times as many are on the full program, but you see here, great group of academics, book authors, thought leaders, and HR leaders from pretty outstanding organizations. Also wanted to very quickly plug for members only. We don't have an exact date and time for this yet, but please do pay attention, particularly for any chief diversity officers out there, anyone that works in that arena. Maybe you're a member of our DE&I exchange, which is a member-only community at I4CP. Next week, we will be doing a member-only flash call focusing on a very timely topic, the executive orders from the new administration on anything DE&I related, immigration related, that sort of thing. So just wanted to give you all a heads up. If that's of interest to you, we will be doing a member-only flash call sometime next week. So watch for that news coming soon. And then lastly, all of our Next Practice weekly sessions are available for recertification credit hours. So if that's relevant for you, Zeta has already put this information over in the chat, but here it is on screen, the program ID and activity ID. Once again, thank you, Lorrie, for leading a great conversation today.
Thanks, Tom. And thanks to Matt and Zeta also for being mission control. We really appreciate your support with engineering all of these calls.
Yeah, and thank you, Lisa. Great insight shared today on what is truly an outstanding program at McDonald's.
Thank you so much.